The storm had torn through the Appalachian night like a wounded beast. Trees groaned under the weight of freezing rain, and lightning ripped open the sky, revealing a dark figure stumbling through the snow. The mother bear's breath came in ragged bursts, her black coat soaked and streaked with blood. Something small wriggled weakly in her jaws. A cub, white as winter itself. Behind her, the roar of another bear thundered through the forest, closer with every second. She turned once, her massive body trembling, torn between fight and flight. Then she ran into the endless dark, clutching the fragile life that the wilderness had already rejected. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. The night pressed against the mountain like a living thing, thick with sleet and the scent of pine. Deep within the ravine, where the roots of ancient trees curled like veins, Luna, the black bear, found refuge beneath an outcrop of stone. Her heart pounded like a drum. The pain of labor had left her trembling, but what filled her chest now wasn't exhaustion. It was terror. The cub in her paws shone faintly in the stormlight. Its fur was pure white, untouched by the color of its kin. Its tiny nose twitched, and a weak cry slipped from its throat, a soft, unfamiliar sound that seemed to echo against the wind itself. Luna's instincts screamed that something was wrong. In the wild, difference meant danger. She knew the rules of the forest as well as she knew the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The strange do not survive. Still, when she nuzzled the cub close, something stronger than fear rose within her. It was love, raw, defiant, and absolute. By morning, the storm had calmed, leaving the forest blanketed in fresh snow. Luna's mate, the massive male known among rangers as Old Slate, lumbered toward the den. His deep rumble filled the clearing. But when he saw the white cub, he froze. His eyes darkened. He sniffed the air, let out a guttural growl, and backed away as though the creature before him were cursed. Within hours, the other bears of the nearby clan gathered. Curious at first, then uneasy. Their huffs turned into low snarls, their heavy bodies shifting in agitation. One young male lunged forward, snapping his jaws dangerously close to the cub. Luna roared, her massive paw striking the earth in warning. The sound silenced them for a moment, but not the judgment in their eyes. Old Slate turned his head and grunted, a command that cut deeper than any wound. Leave. Luna hesitated, her breath visible in the cold air. Her gaze darted between her trembling cub and the life she'd known. The safety of the den, the food, the warmth of the clan. Then she lowered her head and took her cub into her mouth once more. With one final glance at the others, she vanished into the blinding white. For 3 days, Luna wandered through the mountains. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but she refused to rest for long. Every sound in the forest became a threat. Wolves howled in the distance. An eagle's shadow swept over her path. The cub, though fragile, clung to life, its cries growing softer by the hour. Luna stopped once beside a frozen stream, lowering her cub into the crook of her arm. She licked its face gently, as if her love alone could keep it breathing. She remembered her own mother, how she had once taught her that the mountain protects those who belong to it. But now Luna wasn't sure she belonged anywhere. Even nature itself seemed to recoil from the white cub's presence. By the 4th night, the snow had turned to sleet again, and Luna could feel her strength fading. Her paws bled from the ice. The cub whimpered, barely moving. Desperation clawed at her chest. She needed warmth, shelter, something beyond the cruel logic of the wild. Then she smelled it. Wood smoke. Faint, but unmistakable. A scent foreign to the forest, yet strangely hopeful. She followed it, dragging her heavy body through the drifts until the trees opened to reveal something she had never seen before. A small wooden cabin, half buried in snow, its chimney breathing thin wisps of smoke into the pale sky. Inside, a faint light flickered. The sound of metal striking wood echoed through the storm. A man's rhythm, steady and patient. Luna hesitated at the edge of the clearing. Her muscles trembled. Every instinct screamed to stay hidden. Humans were danger. Her kind had always known that. But then, the cub stirred weakly against her chest. She took one step forward, then another. The man inside the cabin, though he did not yet know it, was Caleb Turner, a mountain man whose life had once been filled with love, now hollowed by loss. On this night, he sat beside his fire, carving a small wooden figure of a bear, unaware that destiny was already climbing toward his door through the storm. Outside, Luna's shadow loomed large against the cabin wall. She placed the cub down gently, pressing her muzzle to its head one last time. A sound escaped her, a deep, mournful rumble that seemed to carry the weight of every mother who had ever loved too fiercely. Then, with a trembling paw, she reached out and scratched at the cabin door. The noise startled Caleb. He froze, the carving knife still in his hand. He had lived in these mountains long enough to know the sounds of its creatures. But this was different. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. When he opened the door, the cold wind rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and fear and something else. Trust. And there, in the swirling snow, stood a bear unlike any he had ever seen. Her eyes, dark and desperate, met his. In her arms, a tiny shape moved, glowing faintly in the lantern light. The man and the creature faced each other across the threshold of the wild. In that suspended moment, something ancient and wordless passed between them. Luna lowered her head, a tear glistening on her fur, and gently pushed the cub forward. Caleb didn't move. He couldn't. The cub gave a weak cry. The mother looked once more into his eyes, then turned away, disappearing into the storm without a sound. Only the faint tracks in the snow remained, leading back into the endless dark. Caleb knelt slowly, his breath visible in the chill air. He reached out, touching the tiny creature that fate had laid at his doorstep. Its fur was soft, impossibly white, and warm against his calloused palm. He whispered, almost to himself, "What on earth brought you here, little one?" Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying away the last echo of Luna's presence. The mountain was silent again, but everything had changed. The fire crackled inside the cabin, sending faint shadows across the walls as Caleb Turner stared at the small creature wrapped in an old wool blanket. The cub's breathing was shallow, its tiny chest rising and falling with fragile rhythm. Every few seconds, it let out a soft, trembling whimper that pierced through the cabin's quiet like a ghostly plea. Caleb hadn't seen a living thing so helpless in years, not since the night his own world had shattered in a flash of twisted metal and broken headlights on the mountain road. He swallowed hard, pushing the memory away. The past didn't belong here. The cub did. Caleb rose from his chair and stoked the fire. The cabin smelled of wood smoke, pine resin, and something faintly sweet. The milk he had mixed hastily from powdered formula he kept for emergencies. He poured a small amount into a tin cup, testing the temperature against his wrist. The cub turned its head weakly at the scent. "That's it, little one," he murmured, kneeling beside it. "Come on now." You've made it this far. He dipped his finger into the milk and touched it to the cub's mouth. A hesitant lick, then another. Within moments, it began to drink, tiny sounds filling the air like music. Caleb smiled, an expression he hadn't felt on his face in a long, long time. Outside, dawn was creeping through the trees, staining the snow with faint gold. The storm had passed, but its silence was heavier than the wind that came before it. Caleb stepped to the window and peered out. Tracks led from his porch into the forest, already fading beneath new snowfall. He whispered, "She made it far enough to disappear." For a moment, he imagined the great black bear, Luna, though he didn't yet know her name, moving through the pines, her fur silvered with frost, her heart still tethered to the tiny life she'd left behind. He wondered what it must have taken for her to cross that line between wild and human. The thought left him uneasy. Nature had its rules. He had spent a lifetime learning them, breaking them, and trying to make peace with them. By noon, the cub was sleeping soundly near the hearth. Caleb busied himself repairing a broken latch on the window, though his mind kept circling back to the strange encounter. It wasn't until he heard tires crunching on the snow outside that he remembered the world beyond the woods still existed. He opened the door to find Maggie, wrapped in a thick scarf, holding a basket of supplies. Her cheeks were flushed red from the cold, and her eyes held that mix of irritation and affection she reserved only for him. "Caleb Turner," she said, stepping past him into the cabin. "I swear you'd freeze to death up here if I didn't check on you every week." "I'm still breathing, aren't I?" he muttered, taking her coat. She set the basket on the table. "Coffee, jerky, and some canned peaches. Don't say I never take care of you." But her smile faded when she noticed the small bundle near the fire. "What's that?" Caleb hesitated. "A bear cub." Maggie blinked. "A what?" He gestured for her to keep her voice down. "Found it outside last night. Well, it found me." Maggie crouched near the cub, eyes widening as she saw its fur. "It's white." "My lord Caleb, that's not natural albino," he said softly. "Born different. Its mother brought it here. Gave it to me." "Brought it to you?" Maggie turned to him, disbelief etched on her face. "You mean a full-grown bear walked up and dropped that thing at your doorstep?" Caleb nodded. Storm was tearing the mountain apart. "She must have been desperate." Maggie straightened slowly. "You can't keep it." He looked away. "I'm not planning to. Just keeping it alive." She crossed her arms. "You know how folks in town are about wild animals? And if Ray hears about this?" As if summoned by her words, a distant hum of an engine echoed through the valley. A moment later, a snow-dusted pickup truck appeared down the ridge. Caleb sighed. Too late. The door creaked open again, and Deputy Ray McCarthy, young and broad-shouldered, stepped inside. His uniform looked too new for the mud and snow of the mountains. He nodded politely to Maggie, then fixed his sharp eyes on Caleb. "Morning, Mr. Turner. Heard there was a bear sighting near your ridge last night. Big one. Any truth to that?" Caleb kept his tone even. "Depends what you call truth." Ray stepped further in, glancing at the cub before Caleb could block his view. His brows shot up. "Holy hell. You've got one of them in here?" "It was left here," Caleb replied. Ray crouched, studying the cub. "That's not just any cub." "Looks sick or wrong, different," Caleb said firmly. Ray straightened, frowning. "You know I'm going to have to report this. It's against wildlife regulations to harbor a wild animal, especially a bear. Even a cub." Maggie cut in, her voice calm but sharp. "It's freezing out there, Ray." If Caleb hadn't helped it, it'd be dead. Ray hesitated, then sighed. Look, I get it. You've got a good heart, Mr. Turner, but these creatures belong in the wild. Best thing you can do is call the Wildlife Center down in Asheville. They'll know what to do. Caleb didn't answer. His gaze drifted to the cub, now stirring in its blanket, a faint whimper escaping its mouth. Something inside him tightened, a recognition maybe, or the echo of a father's instinct long buried. Ray took a step closer. I can make the call for you. No, Caleb said quietly. Not yet. Ray blinked. Not yet? Caleb met his eyes. It's too weak. You move it now. It won't last the night. Maggie placed a hand on Ray's arm. Let him try, just for a few days. You can come back and check. Ray exhaled through his nose, weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. 3 days, Turner. Then I'm calling it in. When he left, the sound of the truck faded into the forest, replaced once more by the crackle of the fire. Maggie sat across from Caleb, her expression softer now. You really think you can keep it alive? Caleb didn't answer right away. He took the cub gently into his hands, feeling its heartbeat flutter against his palms. I don't know, he said at last, but I owe it to the one who trusted me. Maggie smiled faintly. You always were stubborn. As night fell again, the mountain grew quiet except for the distant cry of an owl. Caleb added another log to the fire and lay the cub against his chest beneath his flannel shirt, letting his body heat steady its breathing. He closed his eyes, feeling its warmth seep into his own. The loneliness that had haunted the cabin for years seemed to fade, replaced by something fragile yet alive. Outside, snow began to fall once more, blanketing the tracks that led from the forest to his door, tracks that told a story no one else would ever believe. And somewhere out there, under the same dark sky, a mother bear lifted her nose to the wind, listening for the faint heartbeat she had entrusted to a man she'd never known. The storm didn't return that week, but the cold stayed, wrapping the mountain in silence. Caleb woke each morning before dawn to tend the fire and feed the small creature that had claimed his cabin, and, in a way, his heart. The cub's strength had begun to show. Its eyes, once barely open, now followed him as he moved. Its cries had changed too, less frail, more curious, filled with a kind of trust that unsettled and comforted him all at once. He called it Snowdrop. The name came to him one morning while watching the frost melt on the window. The cub's fur glowed in the weak sunlight, soft and white as the first wildflowers that dared to bloom through snow. Snowdrop's world was the cabin. The rhythm of the fire crackle, the sound of Caleb's boots, the smell of pine smoke. Each day he mixed milk, chopped wood, and spoke softly to the cub, though he knew it didn't understand. You've got fight in you, he'd say, rubbing its tiny ears. You're meant to live. 3 days passed. True to his word, Deputy Ray came back. His truck rumbled up the path just as Maggie was leaving after delivering fresh bread and bandages. She gave Ray a look that said everything before he even stepped out. Still got that bear, Turner? Ray asked, stomping the snow off his boots. Caleb nodded. Still alive. Ray entered cautiously, scanning the small room until his gaze fell on the cub sleeping in a box lined with blankets. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The soft hiss of the fire was the only sound. Finally, Ray said quietly, I didn't think it'd last. Neither did I, Caleb replied. Ray scratched the back of his neck. You know what this means. It's surviving because of you. But if the wildlife office finds out, they won't. Maggie interrupted from the doorway. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. Not until that little one can make it on its own. Ray sighed, glancing between them. You two are going to get me fired. Caleb met his gaze. Then don't report it. Yet for a moment, the young deputy hesitated, the conflict plain in his expression. Then he exhaled. 1 week. But you'd better start thinking about what comes next after he left. Caleb leaned against the table, feeling the old ache in his chest return. He had lost everything once because of choices made too late. He wouldn't let hesitation cost another life. Not this time. As days bled into nights, Snowdrop grew stronger. It began to totter around the cabin, bumping into furniture, sniffing Caleb's boots, climbing onto his lap uninvited. Its fur glistened under the firelight, its eyes wide and filled with a strange intelligence. Caleb laughed more often than he had in years, his voice echoing off the wooden walls like something newly reborn. But the forest didn't forget. One night, as Caleb stepped outside to split firewood, a sound stopped him, the unmistakable crack of a branch under heavy weight. He turned slowly, heart thudding. On the edge of the tree line, 2 golden eyes gleamed in the moonlight. A bear. He froze. Not Snowdrop's mother, smaller, probably a wandering male. Its nose twitched, catching the scent of milk and warmth. Hunger radiated from its stance. Caleb's pulse spiked. He grabbed the axe from the stump, his breath forming white clouds in the cold air. The bear growled low, taking a step forward. Caleb didn't shout. He didn't run. He stood his ground, the handle slick in his grip. When it lunged, he swung hard, not to kill, just to make noise. The blade struck the frozen earth with a ringing crack. Sparks flew. The bear stopped, hesitated, then turned and lumbered back into the woods, vanishing between the trees. Caleb lowered the axe, his hands shaking. From inside, he heard a faint whimper. Snowdrop was awake, frightened by the commotion. Caleb knelt beside it when he returned, letting the cub press its face into his shirt. You're safe, he whispered, voice trembling. You're safe now. He didn't sleep the rest of that night. When Maggie visited again 2 days later, she found Caleb bandaging his hand. He'd cut it during the scuffle. Snowdrop toddled nearby, pawing at his bootlaces. You look terrible, Maggie said softly, setting down a pot of stew. Didn't know parenting was this rough, he said with a faint grin. She smiled but didn't return it. You're getting attached, Caleb. He looked up, frowning. Wouldn't you? That's the problem, she replied. You can't keep it. Sooner or later, you'll have to let it go. You know that her words lingered long after she left. Caleb sat by the fire that night, watching Snowdrop sleep. Outside, snowflakes fell quietly against the window pane, soft as ash. He thought of Luna, the mother bear who had stood at his door, trusting him with her child. He didn't know if she was still alive, but he hoped she was. Somehow, the thought of her gave him strength. Snowdrop stirred in its sleep, letting out a soft noise that sounded almost like a sigh. Caleb reached out and brushed a hand over its fur. You'll go home someday, he said. I'll make sure of it. But part of him already feared that day more than anything. As winter began to thaw, small patches of earth peeked through the snow. Caleb built a small pen outside the cabin so Snowdrop could feel the air and smell the woods without wandering too far. The cub rolled clumsily in the dirt, fascinated by the new world. Ray returned again, standing by the fence with a half smile. You've done something I didn't think possible. Caleb looked at him. It's not me. It's her. Ray watched the cub, then said quietly, What happens when she's ready to go? Caleb's gaze drifted toward the distant pines. Then I'll take her back. Ray nodded slowly. I'll hold you to that. When he left, Caleb stayed outside a while longer. The mountains stretched before him, endless and silent. Somewhere out there, a mother bear still roamed, waiting, perhaps, for the moment when the world might give her back what it had taken. And though Caleb didn't know it yet, that moment would come sooner than he expected. Snowdrop grew quickly in the weeks that followed. The once delicate cub had turned into a curious, mischievous bundle of strength, her white fur gleaming like snow under sunlight that filtered through the trees. Every morning, Caleb found new evidence of her energy. Boot tracks scattered across the floor, an overturned bucket, claw marks on his old rocking chair. He couldn't bring himself to scold her. Each act of chaos was proof of life. Caleb had built a fenced pen behind the cabin, large enough for Snowdrop to explore. There she rolled in the mud, climbed short logs, and discovered the meaning of wind. He'd watch from the porch with a faint smile and a tin cup of coffee, feeling something inside him he hadn't felt in years. Peace. But peace in the mountains never lasted long. One evening, Maggie hiked up the ridge, her breath visible in the cool air. She carried a basket of canned goods and a newspaper folded neatly under her arm. "Afternoon, Caleb," she called. "Thought I'd bring you civilization before you forget what it looks like." He smiled, meeting her halfway down the path. "If it's gossip from town, I'd rather not know." "It's not gossip. It's concern," she said, eyes narrowing. "Ray came by the store today. He's been getting questions from wildlife control about some unconfirmed sightings." Caleb's face darkened. "He didn't tell them, did he?" "No, but he's under pressure. Word's spreading about a white bear cub near this ridge." She hesitated. "You know what they'll do if they find out it's here." He didn't need her to explain. He'd seen it before. Animals taken away in cages, tested, tagged, or worse. His hand tightened on the porch rail. "I just need more time." Maggie nodded. "You'll have to be careful, Caleb. People fear what they don't understand." She paused, her voice softening. "But I think she's good for you." That little thing brought the light back in your eyes. He looked out at the cub tumbling in the dirt, her fur dusted with brown. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But I don't know how to let go when the time comes." Maggie didn't answer. She only placed a hand on his arm before heading back down the trail. That night, Caleb awoke to a sound outside, the faint crackle of twigs, followed by a low growl. He grabbed his lantern and stepped onto the porch, the cold biting through his flannel shirt. Snowdrop was pacing inside the pen, restless. Her head snapped toward the trees, nostrils flaring. Then Caleb heard it again, a deeper growl, this time closer. The beam of his lantern caught movement between the pines, a shadow, massive and deliberate. His stomach tightened. It wasn't Luna, he knew that somehow. This one was larger, rougher, its eyes gleaming with hunger. "Get back," Caleb whispered, moving slowly toward the pen. But the bear had already emerged from the darkness. It was a mature male, scarred and desperate after a lean spring. It had caught Snowdrop's scent days ago, perhaps. Now hunger overrode caution. The bear lunged toward the pen, roaring. The flimsy wooden posts splintered instantly. Snowdrop squealed and stumbled backward. Caleb's instincts kicked in. He grabbed the shotgun from beside the door, firing once into the air. The echo rolled down the valley like thunder. The intruder stopped, turned, and stared directly at him. For a long, breathless second, Man and beast measured each other, one driven by fear, the other by hunger. Then, with a guttural snarl, the bear retreated into the woods, leaving a trail of broken branches in its wake. Caleb dropped the gun, running to Snowdrop. She was shaking, but unharmed. Her white fur stood out starkly against the trampled snow. He knelt, wrapping his arms around her as she buried her head against his chest. "It's all right," he murmured, voice raw. "You're safe." But the truth hit him like a blow. She wouldn't be safe for long. Not here. Not with men coming from one side and predators from the other. The next morning, he found Ray waiting outside the cabin, his truck parked halfway up the ridge. The young deputy's expression was heavy with things he didn't want to say. "Morning," Ray said. "Heard a gunshot last night. Everything all right?" "Just a hungry bear," Caleb replied, leaning on his shovel. Ray glanced toward the broken fence, then back to Caleb. "That's what I was afraid of. You can't keep doing this, Turner. She's getting bigger, stronger. One day she's going to follow her instincts, and you won't be able to stop her." "I know." "Then you know what has to happen." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Not yet. She's not ready." "Maybe it's you who's not ready," Ray said gently. Caleb turned away, unwilling to meet his gaze. The younger man sighed and placed a folded note on the porch railing. "The Wildlife Sanctuary in Blue Ridge. If you change your mind, they can help." When he drove off, the sound of the engine faded into the mountains, leaving only the whisper of wind through the pines. That evening, Maggie arrived again, worried after hearing about the shot. She found Caleb sitting outside, the cub curled beside his boots. The mountain was quiet, painted in soft twilight. "She's going to need more than you soon," Maggie said. Caleb nodded slowly. "I know. But I promised her mother I'd give her a chance. And I keep my promises." Maggie's voice trembled. "You talk about that bear like you understand her." He looked out over the forest, his face carved by the flickering light of the lantern. "She trusted me. You don't forget something like that." For a long while, neither spoke. The world seemed suspended in that fragile peace, as if both man and animal understood that this was temporary, beautiful, but fleeting. When Maggie left, Caleb sat beside the sleeping cub. He ran a rough hand through her fur, thinking of the miles of wilderness beyond his cabin. Somewhere out there, Luna still walked the ridges, perhaps searching the air for the scent of the one she had surrendered. "I'll take you home soon," he whispered, "when the mountain says it's time." The next morning, Caleb rose before dawn. The fog clung low, curling around the pines like smoke. He packed a small bag, dried meat, water, a blanket, and slung it over his shoulder. Snowdrop followed him to the porch, her black eyes full of trust. Caleb knelt beside her, pressing his forehead to hers. "It's time to see where you belong," he said softly. He closed the cabin door behind him, its wooden latch clicking into place, and started down the trail. The mountain waited, vast and quiet, as the man and the white bear cub disappeared into the forest's embrace, one carrying a promise, the other carrying a future neither of them could yet imagine. And high above, in the thinning mist, the faint echo of a mother's roar rolled down the ridge, as if the wild itself knew they were coming home. The morning broke gray and cold, the kind of stillness that felt almost sacred. Mist curled over the mountain ridge as Caleb led Snowdrop through the narrow trail, his boots crunching softly in the frost. He carried his pack slung over one shoulder and a heavy heart beneath his flannel coat. The cub trotted close behind him, her pale fur nearly glowing against the shadowed forest. The journey had begun at dawn, when the sky was only beginning to pale. The air was sharp, biting his lungs, and every sound, every crack of a twig, every distant bird call felt amplified in the quiet wilderness. Caleb had walked this trail hundreds of times before, back when hunting and survival were his only language. Now he walked it for a different reason: to say goodbye. Snowdrop, blissfully unaware, bounded ahead to chase a drifting leaf. She had grown strong and steady, her once clumsy gait replaced by confident steps. Watching her, Caleb felt a mixture of pride and dread. Each sign of her strength was a reminder that her time with him was ending. The trail wound upward until they reached a ridge overlooking the valley. Beyond the ridge lay the river basin where he had first seen the tracks of Luna's kind. He stopped, catching his breath, and rested a hand on the cub's back. "Almost there, girl," he said softly. "Almost home." Snowdrop tilted her head at his voice, then nuzzled his leg as if to ask why his scent was tinged with sadness. By noon, the mist had lifted, revealing the long stretch of forest and the dark line of the river cutting through it. The world seemed endless, filled with movement and sound. Ravens circling above, a deer stepping through the brush, the murmur of water downstream. It was the same wilderness where Luna had once trusted a human with her newborn child. Caleb found a clearing near the edge of the river, the ground soft with moss and fallen leaves. He set down his pack and sat heavily on a rock, gazing at the water. Snowdrop approached the river cautiously, dipping her nose to the surface, then pulling back at the cold. He smiled. "You'll get used to it. It's your kind of world now." He pulled a small tin from his pocket and opened it. Inside was a locket, the one his wife had given him years ago. The image of her and their little girl was faded now, almost ghost-like. He turned it over in his rough hands, remembering a time when he had sworn he'd never let anyone, or anything, depend on him again. And yet here he was, breaking that vow, because a mother bear's courage had reopened something he thought long dead. He closed the locket and tucked it back into his pocket. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest sound, a low growl echoing through the trees. Snowdrop froze. Her ears perked, nostrils flaring. Caleb's pulse quickened. He rose slowly, scanning the tree line. At first he saw nothing. Then, from the shadows, a massive figure emerged. A bear, larger than any he'd seen since that night months ago. Her fur was darker now, streaked with silver. Her eyes, fierce yet sorrowful, met his across the clearing. "Luna," he whispered. The mother bear took a step forward, then another, her movements cautious but determined. Snowdrop let out a soft, uncertain whine and pressed closer to Caleb. He crouched beside her. "It's all right," he murmured. "That's your mother." For a long, tense moment, the clearing seemed to hold its breath. Then Luna made a low rumble, deep and resonant. A sound that was neither threat nor greeting, but something older, something instinctual. Snowdrop answered with a small, hesitant grunt. Caleb stepped back slowly, giving space between them. Luna advanced, the earth trembling under her weight. When she reached her cub, she stopped, towering over her. Snowdrop looked up, eyes wide, then made a tiny, uncertain sound, the same soft whimper she'd made the night Luna left her at Caleb's door. The mother lowered her head. Her massive paw brushed against Snowdrop's side, then pulled her close. For the first time, Snowdrop didn't resist. She buried her face in her mother's fur and released a low, trembling cry. Luna's deep growl softened into a sound that could almost be mistaken for relief. Caleb felt something break loose in his chest, a knot of worry, gratitude, and sorrow all tangled together. He took a slow step back, watching them. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, another bear's call echoed through the valley. The moment should have been enough, but nature was rarely so kind. From the opposite side of the clearing came movement, heavy, deliberate. Caleb turned and saw another bear emerging from the woods, larger and more muscular than Luna, its dark fur streaked with mud. Its posture was tense, head lowered, shoulders rippling with aggression. It was Old Slate, the dominant male. Caleb's heart pounded. He knew what was about to happen. In the wild, acceptance was never given freely. The presence of Snowdrop, so visibly different, was a threat to order. Luna moved quickly, placing herself between Old Slate and her cub. The male growled, deep and menacing, circling to test her resolve. Snowdrop squeaked and pressed against her mother's legs. Caleb wanted to intervene, but instinct told him not to. This wasn't his world. Whatever happened next had to unfold by nature's own law. Luna bared her teeth and roared, a sound that shook the trees and sent birds scattering. It was a challenge, not of dominance, but of love. Old Slate hesitated, the muscles in his neck twitching. Then, slowly, he backed away. The clearing fell silent once more, save for the river's distant rush. Luna turned back to her cub, breathing hard but unbroken. She licked Snowdrop's face, her great body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Caleb exhaled, realizing he'd been holding his breath. His knees felt weak. He stepped closer, just enough for Luna to see him again. She didn't growl this time. Their eyes met, a brief, wordless understanding passing between them. She knew what he had done. Caleb spoke softly, voice rough with emotion. "She's strong now. You can keep her safe." Luna blinked once, slowly, as if acknowledging the promise fulfilled. Then she turned, leading Snowdrop away into the trees. Caleb stood there long after they were gone, staring into the forest where the two had vanished. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, beautiful and painful all at once. He packed his things quietly, leaving behind the remains of the small fire he'd built for warmth. Before he turned to go, he picked up a single white tuft of fur caught on a bush and tucked it into his coat pocket. As he began the long walk back to his cabin, the sky opened above him, and light spilled across the mountain. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. That night, back in his cabin, Caleb sat by the fire with his locket in one hand and the tuft of white fur in the other. The world outside was still and quiet, but the ache inside him had changed. It wasn't emptiness anymore. It was peace. He whispered into the flames, "You made it home, little one." Outside, an owl called softly through the dark. The mountain held its breath, waiting for the dawn that would come, the dawn of a new balance between the wild and the human heart. And far beyond the ridge, under the moonlit pines, a white shape moved beside a larger one, blending into the shadows of the living forest. The first snow of late autumn came earlier than usual that year. It drifted softly down through the pines, blanketing the old trails of the Appalachian Ridge, the same paths Caleb Turner had once walked with a white cub trotting faithfully at his side. Months had passed since that morning by the river, but the memory clung to him like the smell of pine smoke, both comforting and bittersweet. He sat by his cabin window now, the glass fogged from the heat of the wood stove. The mountains outside were quiet, their slopes wrapped in the same stillness that came before a long winter. His tools lay untouched on the table. The rifle above the hearth was coated in a thin film of dust. In his hand, he turned the tuft of white fur he had carried home that day. The strands glowed faintly against his rough fingers, a fragile reminder of a creature who had taught him more about love and trust than any sermon ever could. The cabin no longer felt like a place of exile. It had become something gentler, a sanctuary, not from people but from grief. He had kept his promise, and that knowledge settled in his bones like warmth. A knock startled him. Few ever came this far up the ridge, especially in weather like this. Caleb pushed himself up, joints stiff, and opened the door. Maggie stood on the porch, her cheeks red from the cold, her scarf flecked with snow. She smiled in that tired, knowing way she always did. "Still hiding from the world?" she teased softly. "Just keeping an eye on it," he said, stepping aside to let her in. She entered, shaking off the snow. "It smells the same in here, pine and smoke." "You haven't changed a bit." He poured her coffee, the old enamel mugs clinking faintly. "What brings you up this time? You worried I froze to death again?" She laughed. "Actually, no. I came because of this." From her coat pocket, she pulled out a folded newspaper. On the front page was a small photograph, a blurred image taken by a wildlife photographer. In the center of it stood a full-grown bear, massive and powerful, her fur dark and streaked with silver. Beside her, pressed close, was a smaller bear, its coat shining white against the shadowed trees. Caleb's breath caught. "They've been sighted near the river bend," Maggie said quietly. "A pair, a mother and her white cub. Locals say they've been seen several times. The wildlife rangers are keeping their distance. No one wants to disturb them." He reached for the paper, his calloused hands trembling slightly. The photo was grainy, but he didn't need details to know. "They made it," he murmured. "She's still alive." "She?" Maggie asked. "Both of them." They stood in silence for a moment, the crackle of the fire filling the space between words. Maggie smiled, her eyes shining. "You did right by them, Caleb. Not everyone would have risked what you did." He shook his head slowly. "I didn't save them. Luna saved her own child. I just helped her finish what she started." Maggie looked at him for a long moment. "Maybe. But you helped remind the rest of us that there's still something pure out there, something worth believing in." Later that evening, after Maggie had gone, Caleb bundled himself in his coat and stepped outside. The air bit at his skin, sharp and clean. The snow crunched beneath his boots as he walked toward the tree line. The forest seemed to hum with life even in its stillness. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, answered by the faint rustle of wings overhead. Caleb stopped near the edge of the clearing where he had once built the pen for Snowdrop. The posts were long since fallen, half buried beneath snow, but the memory of laughter, soft, growling, innocent, still echoed faintly in his mind. He closed his eyes and listened. At first, there was nothing but the whisper of wind through branches. Then, faintly, from far down the mountain, came a sound so deep and powerful, it seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. A bear's call, low and resonant. He opened his eyes, scanning the dark tree line. Nothing moved there, yet something in him stirred, a recognition beyond sight. It wasn't a warning or a threat. It was a greeting. Caleb smiled, the corners of his eyes creasing. "You're welcome, old girl," he whispered. He stood there a long time until the snow began to fall heavier, wrapping him in white. When he finally returned to the cabin, he felt lighter than he had in years. Over the following weeks, the story of the white bear spread through the nearby towns. People came hoping to catch a glimpse, but rarely saw more than footprints or claw marks in the mud. Wildlife rangers noted how the pair never strayed too close to human paths, as if the mountain itself protected them. Ray came by once with a report from the conservation office. "They're thriving," he told Caleb, smiling. "No signs of malnutrition. They've made a den near the upper valley, about 5 miles from the ridge." Caleb nodded, his heart swelling with quiet pride. "That's far enough for peace." Ray hesitated, then added, "They think the mother might have had another cub this season." Caleb looked up sharply. "Another?" Ray nodded. "A small one. Dark-coated, healthy." A laugh rumbled in Caleb's chest. "Then the mountain's done its work." When the young man left, Caleb returned to his chair by the fire. He stared at the dancing flames, his mind drifting to the sight of a white bear and her family roaming freely under the open sky. He pictured Snowdrop no longer as the fragile creature he'd nursed through the winter, but as something untamed and whole, a bridge between two worlds that rarely understood each other. Spring came slowly that year. The snow receded from the valley, and wildflowers began to push through the thawing ground. Caleb took to walking the trails again, though his pace was slower now. Sometimes at dusk, he would pause near the ridge and watch the river shimmer below. Once, just as the sun was dipping low, he saw movement among the trees, a flash of pale fur and a larger shadow moving beside it. He stood still, barely breathing. The two shapes lingered for only a moment, then disappeared into the forest, as silently as ghosts. Caleb didn't call out. He didn't move. He only smiled. The sight was all the closure he needed. That night, as the stars blinked awake above the mountains, he lit his lantern and opened his worn journal. On the first blank page, he wrote slowly, the pen shaking in his hand. "The mountain taught me this. Love is not possession. It is the courage to let go when the time is right, and the faith that what you've loved will find its way." He closed the book and placed it on the table beside the tuft of white fir. The fire crackled gently, casting long shadows across the cabin walls. Outside, the wind whispered through the pines, carrying with it the faintest sound of a bear's rumbling call, a lullaby from the wild to the man who had finally made peace with it. Caleb leaned back in his chair, his eyes heavy, his heart still and full. Somewhere out there, under the same endless stars, a mother bear guided her white daughter through the forest she once feared. The cub's pale fur shimmered beneath the moonlight, no longer a mark of difference but of grace, a living symbol of trust, of forgiveness, and of the wild's quiet capacity to love. And in the mountains of North Carolina, a cabin's single light burned until dawn, a reminder that sometimes even the hardest hearts can learn to heal when the wilderness chooses to trust them. The greatest barrier in life isn't difference, it's the fear of difference. And when love conquers that fear, both man and nature find their way home. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.